The sound of laughter was deafening. Eliza Morgan stood frozen in the center of the cafeteria, designer coffee dripping from her pristine white blouse, tears welling in her eyes as the whispers and snickers rippled through the crowd. At 16, she had experienced many things that most teenagers could only dream of. Private jets to Paris, backstage passes to sold-out concerts, birthday gifts that cost more than what some of her teachers earned in a year. But in this moment, all her father's billions couldn't shield her from the humiliation burning through her chest. "Looks like Daddy's money can't buy coordination," sneered Vanessa Reynolds, the ringleader behind the accidental collision that had resulted in Eliza's current state. Vanessa's own family was wealthy, but nowhere near the Morgan fortune, and the resentment had festered for years, poisoning every interaction between them since elementary school. What the spectators didn't see was how Eliza's hands trembled as she clutched her ruined bag. They didn't know about the panic attack she'd suffered that morning before school, or how her father had missed her piano recital last week, the 7th family event he'd skipped this year. They saw only the Morgan name, the luxury car that dropped her off each morning, the immaculate appearance that her mother insisted upon maintaining for the family image. "Poor little rich girl," someone muttered, loud enough for Eliza to hear. "What a tragedy. She'll have to buy another $1,000 outfit." Ms. Bennett had witnessed the entire scene from her spot by the door. The English teacher's eyes narrowed behind her simple wire-framed glasses as she made her way through the throng of teenagers. Unlike the other faculty who awkwardly pretended not to notice, or worse, seemed secretly amused by seeing the privileged student taken down a notch, Ms. Bennett moved with purpose. "That's enough," she said, her voice cutting through the noise despite its quiet tone. There was something in that voice, an authority that seemed at odds with her modest appearance, that made even Vanessa's smirk falter momentarily. The teacher draped her own cardigan around Eliza's shoulders, the same navy cardigan she wore at least once a week, with leather patches at the elbows and a slight fray at the cuffs. It smelled of chalk and the lavender tea Ms. Bennett drank every morning. "Come with me," she said to Eliza, then turned to the crowd. "The rest of you have exactly 3 minutes to clear this area and get to your next classes." As they walked away, Eliza heard Vanessa's stage whisper, "God, Bennett is such a charity case. Did you see those shoes she's wearing? My housekeeper has better taste." The social ecosystem of Westlake Academy operated with brutal efficiency. Founded originally to educate the children of the city's elite, the school had eventually opened its doors to scholarship students and faculty children, creating a volatile mix of extreme wealth, middle-class aspirations, and genuine academic talent. The unspoken hierarchy determined everything from lunch table assignments to group project formations. In Ms. Bennett's classroom, a haven away from the cafeteria chaos, Eliza finally broke down completely. "They hate me," she sobbed, mascara tracing dark rivers down her flushed cheeks. "They've always hated me, and I don't even know why. I never did anything to them." Ms. Bennett didn't immediately respond with platitudes about teenagers being cruel or how things would get better. Instead, she opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small silver tin. "My mother used to say that chocolate doesn't fix problems, but it makes them easier to face," she said, offering the tin of homemade chocolate squares. "Family recipe." Eliza took one hesitantly. "Why are you being nice to me? Everyone thinks I'm just a spoiled brat." "Do you know why I became an English teacher, Eliza?" Ms. Bennett asked, seemingly changing the subject. "Because stories teach us that people are never just one thing. The villain has moments of kindness. The hero has flaws. The princess might be trapped in a tower, but perhaps she put herself there for reasons we don't yet understand." She paused, studying Eliza's face with an intensity that made the girl both uncomfortable and curious. "I see how you slip half your lunch to Samuel Peters every day, the scholarship student who can't afford the cafeteria prices. I notice when you deliberately miss questions in class so Vanessa can answer them instead, feeding her ego while diminishing your own light. I've read your essays, Eliza. The real ones, not the safe versions you eventually turn in." Eliza's breath caught. She had written a deeply personal piece about the loneliness of wealth for Ms. Bennett's class, only to panic and submit a bland analysis of The Great Gatsby instead. Somehow, the teacher had seen both. "How did you? You left the original in the classroom printer last month, Ms. Bennett explained. I recognized your writing style immediately. A knock at the door interrupted them. Principal Hargrove entered without waiting for a response. His tailored suit and carefully maintained silver hair projecting the image of authority that Westlake parents expected. Ms. Bennett, he said with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Reynolds just called my office, quite concerned about an incident in the cafeteria. Something about her daughter being publicly humiliated by a faculty member. The accusation hung in the air, absurd in its reversal of what had actually transpired. But Eliza recognized the dance that was about to begin, the same choreography that had played out countless times before. Wealthy parent complains, administration capitulates, truth becomes irrelevant. What happened next would change everything at Westlake Academy. Ms. Bennett slowly stood from her chair, removing her glasses and placing them carefully on her desk. For the first time, Eliza noticed the teacher's eyes, a striking shade of green with flecks of gold that seemed suddenly familiar. Robert, Ms. Bennett addressed the principal by his first name, something no teacher at Westlake would dare to do. I think it's time we had a conversation about the Reynolds family, and the Morgan family, and, most importantly, about the Bennett family. She reached for the small locket that always hung around her neck, the only piece of jewelry she ever wore, and clicked it open. But first, she said, her voice transforming into something altogether different. I need to show Eliza who I really am. Principal Hargrove's face drained of color as Ms. Bennett held the locket in her palm. Inside was a small photograph, faded and worn from years of being carried close to her heart. You recognize her, don't you, Robert? Ms. Bennett's voice had changed, the careful modulation of a public school teacher giving way to something more refined, more assured. Gone was the slight hesitation in her speech, the deliberate downplaying of her presence that had defined her 5 years at Westlake Academy. Eliza leaned forward, curiosity momentarily overriding her distress. The photograph showed a much younger Ms. Bennett standing beside a distinguished older man on the deck of what appeared to be a massive yacht. Both were smiling broadly at the camera, the family resemblance unmistakable in their matching green-gold eyes. That's Maxwell Bennett, Principal Hargrove stammered, his authoritative demeanor crumbling. The Maxwell Bennett. Eliza's eyes widened. Even she knew that name. Maxwell Bennett had revolutionized renewable energy technology in the early 2000s, creating a fortune that had rivaled, and some said surpassed, the wealth of tech giants and oil magnates combined. His mysterious disappearance from public life had fueled tabloid speculation for years, until the news of his death 3 years ago had briefly dominated headlines. My father, Ms. Bennett confirmed quietly. And my name isn't just Bennett. It's Elizabeth Catherine Bennett Harrington. The room seemed to tilt on its axis as Eliza processed this information. The Bennett Harrington Foundation was legendary in philanthropic circles. Even her father spoke of it with reverence. The foundation controlled assets estimated at over $40 billion. Dedicated to environmental conservation and educational initiatives worldwide. But you've been teaching here for 5 years, Eliza said, finding her voice. You drive that old Honda. You wear the same clothes over and over. You bring lunch in plastic containers. Ms. Bennett, or rather Elizabeth Bennett Harrington, smiled gently. Yes, I do all those things. By choice. She turned back to Principal Hargrove, whose shock was giving way to a calculated reassessment of the situation. Robert, would you give us a moment? I promise we'll discuss the Reynolds situation afterward. Once the door closed behind him, Elizabeth sat across from Eliza, their knees almost touching in the small space. 15 years ago, I was you, she began, her voice soft but clear. I was the daughter everyone envied and resented in equal measure. Elizabeth Bennett Harrington, sole heir to the Bennett fortune, expected to take over my father's empire when the time came. She twisted the simple silver band on her right hand. Not a wedding ring, Eliza realized, but some kind of family signet. I had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. My friends weren't friends at all. Just people positioning themselves to benefit from my family's influence. My boyfriends were interested in what I represented, not who I was. Even my teachers treated me differently, either with excessive deference or thinly veiled contempt. The parallels to Eliza's own life hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. When I was 22, I nearly died of an overdose at a party in the Hamptons. Not because I was an addict, I barely even drank, but because someone thought it would be funny to see the perfect princess lose control for once. Elizabeth's voice remained steady, but her eyes reflected old pain. While I was recovering, my father sat by my hospital bed for 3 days straight. He blamed himself for the emptiness of my life, for raising me in a bubble of privilege without purpose. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the immaculate grounds of Westlake Academy, the carefully tended gardens and the gleaming sports facilities donated by various alumni families. That's when we made a plan together. I would disappear from the socialite circles, finish my education anonymously, and find my own way in the world. My father continued to run the company publicly while I worked behind the scenes, learning every aspect of the foundation. When he died, I inherited everything, but legally, the world thinks Maxwell Bennett's fortune went entirely to his charitable foundation. Eliza's mind raced, connecting dots she'd never noticed before. The mysterious director of the Bennett Harrington Foundation who never appeared in public. The educational initiatives that had, coincidentally, provided substantial funding to schools like Westlake, with their scholarship programs for underprivileged students. So you're actually rich? Like, really rich? It sounded childish the moment she said it, but Elizabeth didn't seem offended. I'm wealthy beyond most people's comprehension, she acknowledged without pride or shame. But I choose to live simply because I discovered something during my years of anonymity. Authentic human connection is impossible when people see your bank account instead of your soul. She returned to her seat, taking Eliza's hands in her own. For 5 years, I've been teaching at schools funded by my own foundation, moving every few years to avoid detection. I drive an old car and wear simple clothes not because I have to, but because it allows me to be seen for who I am rather than what I own. But why reveal yourself now? Eliza asked, still trying to reconcile the modest English teacher with the powerhouse philanthropist sitting before her. You could have just reported Vanessa and kept your secret. Elizabeth's expression hardened slightly. Because I've watched the culture at this school deteriorate under Robert's leadership. I've seen how wealth has become not just an advantage here, but a weapon. The Reynolds family has systematically bullied 3 students into transferring out this year alone, all because Vanessa felt threatened by their academic performance. She leaned forward intently. And I've watched you, Eliza Morgan, trying so desperately to be invisible despite your name, to diminish yourself to avoid their resentment. I recognized myself in you, and I couldn't stay silent any longer. A soft knock interrupted them, and the door opened to reveal not just Principal Hargrove, but a furious-looking woman in designer activewear. Vanessa's mother, Patricia Reynolds. I demand to know why my daughter is being accused. Mrs. Reynolds began, then stopped abruptly as her eyes landed on Elizabeth. Her outrage transformed instantly into wide-eyed shock. Lizzie? Lizzie Bennett Harrington. Elizabeth stood, her posture shifting subtly as she seemed to grow taller, more commanding. The transformation was remarkable, the humble teacher vanishing completely as the heiress emerged. Hello, Patricia, she said coolly. It's been a long time, 15 years, I believe, since you were my maid of honor in a wedding that never happened. Because the night before, you told my fiancé about my father's cancer diagnosis and how it might affect his access to the Bennett fortune. Mrs. Reynolds paled visibly, her perfectly made-up face suddenly ashen. That's not what happened. I was trying to protect you. We both know that's not true, Elizabeth replied, her voice gentle but firm. Just as we both know what really happened in the cafeteria today. She turned to include Principal Hargrove in her gaze. I think it's time we had a frank discussion about the values this school claims to uphold. Don't you? And perhaps about the $3 million my foundation contributed to the new science wing. Funding that can, of course, be redirected if necessary. As the adults moved toward the principal's office, Elizabeth paused at the door, looking back at Eliza with quiet intensity. Your father's wealth doesn't define you, Eliza. Neither does their judgment. Remember that. The door closed behind them, leaving Eliza alone with a chocolate square melting between her fingers and a world that had suddenly, irrevocably changed. The news spread through Westlake Academy like wildfire. By morning, everyone knew. The unassuming Miss Bennet, with her second-hand clothes and modest Honda, was actually Elizabeth Bennet Harrington, controller of a $40 billion foundation and arguably the most influential philanthropist in the country. The teacher who graded their papers and gently corrected their grammar could have purchased the entire school and everything within a 5-mile radius without making a dent in her fortune. The revelation transformed the school overnight. Eliza arrived the following day to find students parting before her like the Red Sea, not out of the grudging acknowledgement of her family's wealth that she was accustomed to, but with expressions of uncertainty and reassessment. The hierarchy had been violently disrupted. If Ms. Bennet could be secretly wealthy beyond comprehension while driving a 15-year-old car, what other assumptions might be wrong? More shocking still was the absence of both Principal Hargrove and Patricia Reynolds from campus. Rumors circulated about a heated closed-door meeting, about threats of pulled funding and exposed secrets. By lunchtime, an email had been sent to all parents announcing an emergency restructuring of administrative positions and the creation of a new Ethics and Inclusion Committee to be headed by outside consultants. Vanessa Reynolds sat alone at lunch, her usual court of admirers noticeably dispersed. The vulnerability in her expression as she picked at her food reminded Eliza of how she herself had felt countless times. Isolated despite being surrounded by people, judged before being known. "Is anyone sitting here?" Eliza asked, tray in hand, surprising herself with her own boldness. Vanessa looked up, suspicion and confusion warring on her face. "Why would you want to sit with me, after what I did?" "Because Miss Bennet Harrington is right," Eliza said, sliding onto the bench. "People are never just one thing, not even you." It was an olive branch, fragile and uncertain, but it was a beginning. As they ate in awkward silence, Samuel Peters, the scholarship student Eliza had been secretly sharing food with, approached tentatively, his own tray clutched in nervous hands. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, eyes darting between the two girls. Eliza nodded, and after a moment Vanessa did too. "Did you know?" Samuel asked Eliza once he was seated. "About Ms. Bennet?" "No," Eliza admitted. "But now I understand why she always seemed to see me. Really see me. I mean, she was the only teacher who never made me feel like I should be grateful just to be here," Samuel said quietly. "Even some of the other scholarship kids look down on me because my mom cleans houses for a living." Vanessa flinched slightly at this, perhaps remembering her own cutting remarks about housekeepers. "My dad started out detailing cars," she said unexpectedly, her voice barely audible. "No one knows that. He gets so angry if anyone mentions it." The confession hung in the air between them, a small truth offered in exchange for the chance at a fresh start. By week's end, Ms. Bennet Harrington had returned to teaching her English classes as if nothing had changed, though everything had. She wore the same modest clothes, drove the same aging car, and carried the same worn leather satchel. But she no longer pretended to be less than she was. The locket remained visible around her neck, a reminder of her true identity. On Friday afternoon, she asked Eliza to stay after class. "The foundation is establishing a new youth leadership program," she explained once they were alone. "We're looking for student ambassadors who understand both privilege and purpose. I thought you might be interested." Eliza hesitated. "Because of my family?" "Because of who you are," Ms. Bennet Harrington corrected gently. "Because even when you were being bullied and isolated, you noticed Samuel going hungry and did something about it. Because you have compassion that wasn't taught to you. It comes from within." She handed Eliza a slim folder. "The program pairs students from different socio-economic backgrounds to work together on community initiatives. I've already spoken with Samuel. And with Vanessa." Eliza's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Vanessa? Really? People can surprise you when given the chance to be more than their worst moments," Ms. Bennet Harrington said with a small smile. Her mother has enrolled in the parent component of the program. It seems your little lunch table rebellion made quite an impression. The following Monday, Ms. Bennett Harrington's classroom became the unofficial meeting place for what the students were calling the Identity Project. What began with 3 unlikely allies, Eliza, Samuel, and Vanessa, soon expanded to include a dozen students from across Westlake's previously impenetrable social divides. They shared stories that had never been told before. About parents who worked 3 jobs to afford Westlake's tuition, about the pressure of maintaining appearances when family businesses were failing, about the loneliness of being valued only for what you represented rather than who you were. For the first time in her life, Eliza felt truly seen, not as Richard Morgan's daughter or the girl worth billions, but as herself. Just Eliza, with her passion for classical piano and her secret dream of becoming a photojournalist instead of taking over her father's tech empire. The most profound transformation, however, came 6 weeks later, when Richard Morgan himself appeared in Ms. Bennett Harrington's classroom after school hours. He had been traveling in Asia when the events at Westlake unfolded, and Eliza had been uncharacteristically circumspect in explaining the changes at school. Elizabeth rose to greet him, extending her hand with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with powerful personalities. "Mr. Morgan, I've been looking forward to meeting you." Richard Morgan looked slightly disoriented, as powerful men often did when confronted with someone they couldn't immediately categorize. "You're Bennett's daughter, the one who's been teaching my Eliza while sitting on billions. And you're the man who's been raising an extraordinary young woman while perhaps not fully appreciating what makes her extraordinary," Elizabeth replied evenly. Instead of the defensive reaction Eliza expected, her father actually looked taken aback. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. "Direct. I like that." He glanced at Eliza, who was frozen in the doorway. "She's been different these past weeks. More herself, somehow. I came to see why." Elizabeth gestured to the student projects displayed around the room. Photographic essays capturing lives across the economic spectrum, poems about identity and belonging, manifestos for community change. "Your daughter helped create this," she explained. "Not with money or influence, but with compassion and courage. She's building bridges where most people only see divides." Richard moved slowly around the room, examining the students' work with uncharacteristic attention. He paused at a photograph Eliza had taken, a split composition showing Samuel's mother cleaning a mansion in the morning and proudly attending her son's academic award ceremony in the evening, dignity evident in both contexts. "You took this?" he asked Eliza. She nodded, heart racing. "It's for our exhibition, Worlds Within Worlds, the true face of privilege." Her father was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Elizabeth with an expression Eliza had rarely seen, something like respect mixed with uncertainty. "I built my company from nothing," he said. "Worked 18-hour days. Missed a lot. I thought I was giving Eliza everything by making sure she'd never have to struggle the way I did." "The greatest privilege isn't freedom from struggle," Elizabeth replied. "It's having the resources to choose which struggles are worth your time." Later, as they walked to his waiting car, Richard Morgan placed an arm around his daughter's shoulders, an awkward gesture from a man unaccustomed to physical affection. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said hesitantly, "about scaling back, about seeing more of the world together as a family. Your photography it shows how you see things. I'd like to see more of that." Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes, but for the first time in years, they weren't tears of isolation or frustration. "I'd like that too, Dad." As the Morgan car pulled away from Westlake Academy, Eliza caught sight of Ms. Bennett Harrington standing at her classroom window, the afternoon sun glinting off her locket. The teacher raised her hand in a small wave, one heiress to another, one human being to another, across the distance that money could create and that only understanding could bridge. In that moment, Eliza understood the final lesson that Ms. Bennett had been teaching all along. True identity isn't determined by bank accounts or family names, but by the choices we make when no one is looking, by the compassion we offer when there's nothing to gain, and by the courage to be authentically ourselves in a world obsessed with appearances. The transformation of Westlake Academy continued, rippling outward from that one moment of truth in a classroom when a teacher had revealed not just her identity, but the potential in every student to be more than the labels society had given them. And it had all begun with tears in a cafeteria, the vulnerability that had ultimately become strength.